Let's turn our Bibles tonight to Ezekiel chapter 37. I'm not sure whether we're going to get through that. There are some worksheets out the back on the foyer there, if you haven't got one. And I've called it the two sticks prophecy, and it might be quite evident once we've looked at it. But often this is overlooked. Most people go to talk about the dry bones, the valley of dry bones, which we've done. But this is the next part of it, and it's all associated with it, with Ezekiel and the two-stick prophecy. And it's continuing to point out that Israel's restoration and resurrection as a nation is going to happen, and how it's going to happen. And Ezekiel is assuring the people they will be once again united as a nation under one king, greater than David, and will live in peace and prosperity, and their God will live among them. This hasn't happened at any stage in the history that we have, but it's coming. And this is the comfort and encouragement that is giving these exiles in Babylon. And so what we have next is what I call a validating visual. A validating visual. Here in this chapter, these section of verses, Ezekiel is providing a graphic visual presentation about what God will do with Israel during the end times. And it's a public presentation. And to grab people's attention, he takes two sticks to get their attention. He wanted them to hear God's message as well as see the truth of that message. So, in other words, he's got them together and he's going to give them a message and a visual presentation that they're not going to forget anytime soon. And it's to provide encouragement for the nation's future. Now, in Genesis chapter 41, verses 50 and 52, it says this: two sons were born to Joseph before the famine came. Asnath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, was their mother. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, saying, "Certainly God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's house." He named the second child Ephraim, saying, "Certainly God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." Now, what were the two sons' names? Manasseh and Ephraim. Remember them. They're important. So here we've got Jacob and his family, along with 70 people, went down from Canaan to Egypt, seeking to find food because of a severe famine in the land. Years later, with Jacob on his deathbed, he calls his sons to bless them, including the two sons of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim. They received an inheritance of the covenant that God made with Abraham that was passed down to Jacob. Some 400 years later, actually 1444 BC, Moses led over 1.2 million Israelites out of Egypt, and during their wandering in the wilderness, each tribe was given property according to the 12 tribes. And you'll find that listed in Numbers 34. The promised land had four boundaries: to the north, to the west, to the south, and to the east. And each tribe was awarded a portion of land as an inheritance from the Lord. And I hope I remembered to put it in. I'm getting forgetful in my old age. No, there you go. See, I didn't forget it. And so you will see, if you look at this, the different tribes. I get it there. No, it's not going to work today. But you'll see the different tribes that are marked out: Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali, Issachar up the top. Then you'll see in the middle there where Shechem is, Manasseh, Gad, Ammon, and then just under Manasseh, Ephraim, Dan, Benjamin, Judah, and then you'll see Moab, etc. All clearly laid out according to scriptures. Now the children of Israel wandered 40 years before they went into the promised land under the leadership of Joshua in 1400 BC, who divided the land according to God's allocation to the tribes, including the land that was also allocated to Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And you'll find that in Joshua chapter 16 and 17. Look it up for yourself. 400 years later, Saul became the first king of Israel, who was followed by David, who was followed by, and in all of those years, the kingdom was one solid kingdom. Then something happened. Solomon died, which we all got to die sometime, but Solomon died in 931 BC, and he left the kingdom to his son Rehoboam. And then what we have, at least I think we have, yes, the kingdom now becomes divided between the north and the south. But Solomon left the kingdom to his son Rehoboam, and many refused to accept him as their king. They wanted to elect Jeroboam to be their king instead. So the nation became divided. Rehoboam was king over the southern kingdom, which he called Judah, and it had two tribes, Judah and Benjamin. So in the southern, I always get these confused. The southern kingdom had how many tribes? Which were? Judah and Benjamin. Now I'm not going to ask you. Jeroboam was king over the northern kingdom, and it was called Israel, an independent nation from the south. I wonder if you can tell me what the other 10 names are. No. Just have a look at it. But it was the rest of them were under the northern kingdom. So basically you got one kingdom in the south with 2 tribes, and then the northern kingdom with 10 tribes under another king. So instead of being a united nation with one king, they became a divided king, the north and the south, and that stayed away. That situation stayed the same until Israel was reborn as a single nation on the 14th of May 1948. It became a single nation once again. Then we see the action in verses 15 to 17. The Lord's message came to me, "As for you, son of man, take one branch and write on it, for Judah and for the Israelites associated with him. Then take another branch and write on it, for Joseph, the branch of Ephraim, and all the house of Israel associated with him. Join them as one stick. They'll be as one in your hand." So if we see what's taking place here, Ezekiel is told to take 2 sticks or branches and write on them specific names, the names of Judah on one, Joseph and Ephraim on the other stick, to represent the 10 tribes of the north. So you have 2 separate sticks together. Now in Scripture, Ephraim, called Israel, is often used to reference the whole of the northern kingdom. And Jeroboam the first was appointed the first king of the north. He was from the tribe of Ephraim in 1 Kings 11. Prophets such as Jeremiah and Hosea referred to Ephraim as the northern kingdom, and in 722 BC they were taken into captivity by the Assyrians, while Judah was taken into exile by Babylon in 605, 597 and 586 BC. So you can see the kingdom split, divide, and they're taken away by the various world powers. Now, as I was thinking about this illustration, I wonder what you would think if I got 2 sticks and wrote 2 names on and said they're going to be one. I wonder what you would be thinking. You probably think I've been out in the sun too long. But it would certainly capture your attention, and certainly you'd be focused on what I was doing. But it's interesting. It seems strange to you and I as to why God would command these names to be written on 2 sticks. I mean, why not write them on stone? Why not write them on paper or something like that? Why write them on 2 sticks? Does anyone know?
Just let
No. Human beings are pretty creative. Yes. If we look at Numbers chapter 17 verse 1 and 6, and I'll read them to you, it provides us with some information. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and receive from them a staff or branch from each tribe, one from every tribal leader, 12 of them. You must write each man's name on his branch or staff. You must write Aaron's name on the staff of Levi, for one staff is for the head of every tribe. You must place him in the tent of meeting before the ark of the covenant, where I'll meet with you. And the staff of the man whom I choose will blossom. So I will rid myself of the complaints of the Israelites when they murmur against you." So Moses spoke to the Israelites, and each of their leaders gave him a staff or branch, one for each leader according to their tribes. 12 staffs, the staff of Aaron was among their staffs. Then Moses placed the staffs before the Lord in the tent of testimony. So you get the picture why it was written on a branch? The tribes, the heads of tribe, were represented on these sticks, just as the Lord commanded. So it was something God commanded Moses to write the names of the 12 tribes on these sticks or branches for their identity. Now in this visual presentation, Ezekiel takes the 2 sticks in his hands, combines them as one branch to indicate to the people present the 2 nations that were divided are now going to be united as one again. They would become a sovereign nation as it once had been in the days of David and Saul and Solomon. So that's what his action represented. The divided nations would now be as one. Then we see the answer. When your people say to you, "Will you not tell us what these things mean?" Tell them, "This is what the sovereign Lord says. Look, I'm about to take the branch of Joseph that is in the hand of Ephraim and the tribes of Israel associated with him, and I'll place them on the stick of Judah and make them into one stick. They'll be one in my hand." Ezekiel responds to the question that the people are asking as he presents it. What do these 2 sticks mean? And Ezekiel answers the people by saying, these 2 sticks or branches that are separated from one another now, I will take them and make them one. This is the Lord's message to you, so pay attention. It's going to happen. This is something that God is saying that he alone will do. He will join these 2 separated sticks together and he will make them one. He will show his power to the world and let the world know that he is the one who controls all of the history of the world, both in the past, both in the present, and also in the future. Now think about the impact that this message would have upon those who are in exile at this moment. They had seen their kingdom divided. They had looked back to the glory days of David and Solomon. They seemed far, far in the distant past. And yet here's this message that says, hey, look, things are going to change. Things are going to change. And it wasn't a matter of culture rewriting itself. God says, I'm going to rewrite your history for you. And guess what? The 2 nations that were divided are now going to become one. In other words, God was saying that all is not lost. God is still with them, still keeping his promises, and he hasn't abandoned them. The fact was they abandoned him, and that's why they were where they were. Because of their rebellion, because of their sin against him. Judgment had been brought against them because they refused to listen, they refused to pay attention to him. This message reinforces his love for them. Sure, they had sinned. They knew they couldn't break God's rules and get away with it. But they also understood by this illustration that God would restore them to a better state and place than they'd ever experienced under King David and Solomon. So that provided them hope when they were in their worst situation.
Going
No, that's a bright light. All right. Then we see a valuable validation. Now, what happens when people have a disagreement with one another? Human nature, what do we do? I'm not talking to you anymore until you apologise. Isn't that usually what happens? We don't talk. No speakies. I'm not your friend anymore until you make things right. And so there's a separation. If I'm walking down the street and you're walking down the street, what usually happens? We're not going to unite together and say, "Welcome, friend, how are you?" We're remembering the offence. And so basically it's interesting how human nature, we can have problems, we can experience difficulties, and those difficulties can separate us. And even in the times of separation, we sometimes wonder, what did I say? What did I do? How did I upset that person? What was it? I can't ask that other person because they're not talking to me. But we value the friendship and we want validation. We want acceptance. Even though we can agree to disagree, we still want to know that, hey, you still value me as a person, rather than separate because of a disagreement. Validation is a way of support. It's also a time of strengthening. It's a way to communicate that relationship is important. Even if we have a difference of opinion or position, we still are able to accept one another. In this section of verses, God is validating Israel as his chosen people. He is reaffirming to them, I am not finished with you, neither have I abandoned you. I have plans for your future. And he's affirming for them that their broken state of captivity, that I am there with you. The future is better than what the past was. That would have been a comfort for them to know their God was still in control. He was still honouring his promises to Abraham. They had been determined to be like the other nations. They had wanted to do their own thing, to go their own way, and just have God as an option B in their lives when things got wrong. They got screwed up a bit. Plan B, I'll go to God as the last resort. Now God understood and reminded them on so many occasions that the reason you are where you are now is because you brought it upon yourself. And you left me with no other choice but to discipline you. I have done this in order to bring you back to myself, so you can become all you can be. God says this is something that's going to happen, believe me. And if I put it in our terms, buckle up, hang on, and enjoy the ride. It might be a bit bumpy though, but nonetheless, God is saying, I'm in control, and it will happen. He gives them an affirmation in verses 20 and 22. The sticks you write on will be in your hand in front of them. Then tell them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Look, I'm about to take the Israelites from among the nations where they've gone. I will gather them from around and bring them to their land. I'll make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel, and one king will rule over them all. They'll never again be two nations and never again be divided into two kingdoms. Ezekiel takes the sticks, he places them out in front of him so the people will see, and God affirms them that he will bring them back from the nations to which they have been scattered. In 722 BC, the 10 northern tribes have been carried off to Assyria, while the 2 southern tribes were carried off to Babylon and dispersed throughout the nation. We know in AD 70 the Romans destroyed the temple and they scattered the Jewish people further into different countries and nations to escape persecution. Now the interesting thing is that in most countries of the world you'll find Jewish people. Most countries of the world. As of 2020, how many Jewish people do you think are in America? A lot. That would cover a multitude, wouldn't it? But actually, there's 5.7 million Jewish people in America as of 2020. 5.7 million. There are some 8,446,900 Jewish people worldwide, living in 90 countries. And Australia, how many Jewish people are living in Australia? How many millions? No, Australia has 113,400 Jewish people as of 2020. So every nation of the world has got them. I could have just shown you so many statistics of every country and the percentage of Jewish people that are in it. But slowly, but surely, the Jewish people are coming back to Israel from all over the world. And they have a current population of 6,738,500 people since it was reborn in 1948. And it's growing. I read a report the other day that the ministers in Israel are worried about the number of their people coming home, that they don't have the resources to house them, feed them or clothe them. What a wonderful problem to have, that people are coming back. Now Matthew chapter 24 verses 29 to 31, it says, immediately after suffering of those days the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall away from heaven and the powers of heaven will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man arriving on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet blast, and this is what he do. They will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. He's going to gather them all together. After the great tribulation, God says to his people, you'll be united under the leadership of his Son, Jesus Christ, and never again be separated or divided as a nation or people. All of this pointing to the millennial kingdom, where God sets up his kingdom on earth through his Son, Jesus Christ, and reigns and rules. That's still to come. But he gives them further assurance that they'll be completely forgiven in verse 23, the assertion. They will not defile themselves with their idols, their detestable things, and at all their rebellious deeds. I will save them from all their unfaithfulness by which they sinned. I'll purify them, they'll become my people, and I will become their God. God asserts that one day in the future, in this millennial kingdom, there'll be a literal transformation of both people and land. Instead of being separated from God as they now are, because of their chasing after the gods of other nations, they're told this will not be something that happens again in the future. Zechariah 13, 1-2. In that day there'll be a fountain opened up for the dynasty of David and the people of Jerusalem, to cleanse them from sin and impurity. And also on that day, says the Lord of heaven's army, I will remove the names of the idols from the land, and they'll never again be remembered. Moreover, I will remove the prophets and the unclean spirit from the land. Also in Jeremiah 32, 37-41, which you can read, and Jeremiah 33, 6-9, talks about the same things, removing those idols, those things that got them into trouble in the first place. In this particular period, they'll only be interested in one leader, and it'll be the Lord Jesus Christ. They'll not chase after the idols and things of other nations. They'll be content with their God who'll be living among them. Then we go to what I call a victorious viceroy in verses 24 to 28. And what this is talking about is God appoints his son Jesus Christ to set up his earthly kingdom and rule over the nations of the world. Now this is a literal reign with a literal king in a literal time. It's not a spiritual kingdom. It's speaking about a literal time with a literal king. From scriptures we know that Satan opposes anything that God proposes, and he's working hard to undermine and destroy all that is good. The world will become the battleground for the souls of men, and in the time of Jacob's trouble, Satan's man, the Antichrist, will try to rule the world through force and violence. He will seek out and try to destroy all the Jewish people at the halfway point of the tribulation period. Now, please don't get lost on me here. I know I've been asked a question, Pastor, where do we fit in this? Well, I want you to hang in there because I'm going to address that in the future by looking at some charts that show exactly where the church is and what's happening at that time, as well as just a brief reference to the time of Jacob's trouble, which I've done in depth over the years, and we'll just highlight some things there. But it's talking about this particular period in the time of Jacob's trouble. But at the end of this time of Jacob's trouble, Jesus Christ will come and intervene against the nations of the world who are under the leadership of the Antichrist and will launch an all-out attack against Jerusalem and its people. The scriptures tell us Jesus Christ will overcome the forces of evil, lock up the Antichrist and rescue his people, the Jewish nation. They'll enter the millennial kingdom where he'll reign and rule as their king in Jerusalem. It's all in the book, and it's a wonderful book to read and study. The authority, verses 24 and 25. My servant David will be king over them. There'll be one shepherd for all of them. They will follow my regulations and carefully observe my statutes. They'll live in the land I give to my servant Jacob, in which your fathers lived. They will live in it, they and their children and their grandchildren forever. David, my servant, will be prince over them forever. Now the prophecies that we've looked at here in Ezekiel and also Jeremiah tell us that the Jewish people will one day return to their own country. They'll no longer be under the rule of Gentile kings or nations. Jeremiah 30. They'll be restored. They'll be cleansed. They'll enjoy a new relationship with their God, who will provide them with a king of his own choosing. This king in many ways would be like King David, and I believe they refer to the Messiah, Jesus Christ, the servant of the Lord, in Isaiah 42. We know that the Jewish people did refer to the Messiah as David because he would come from David's line. In Matthew 15, Jesus is referred to as the son of David. Now there are many commentators who believe that David will be resurrected at the beginning of the millennial, along with all the other Old Testament saints who will report to Jesus as King of the world. Now, we can't be dogmatic about it because we're going to have to wait and see what happens on the day. But it's an interesting thought. Other scriptures indicate that Jesus will be King of Israel, and they're found throughout many of the Old Testament scriptures. Then we're told there would be an agreement. I'll make a covenant of peace with them. It will be a perpetual covenant with them. I will establish them, increase their numbers, and place my sanctuary among them forever. This is the period of time in which Israel will be at peace with God. They'll be at peace with the nations. They'll be at peace with each other. And the nations of the world will finally recognize her right to exist. That doesn't happen now, but a day is coming where they will. They'll have a perpetual covenant with God that will last forever. Their numbers, they'll have tremendous growth and development, both as a people and both in land. And God assures them he'll set up his throne in Jerusalem, and meet with them just as he did with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden before their fall into sin. It's marked by a tremendous time of peace and prosperity, such as Israel, or for that matter, the whole world has never experienced to this point in time. The acknowledgement, my dwelling place will be with them, I'll be their God, they'll be my people. Then when my sanctuary is among them forever, the nations will know that I, the Lord, sanctify Israel. Zechariah 8:3 says, Thus said the Lord, I am returned unto Zion, and will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem will be called the city of truth, and the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. When we look at Jerusalem today, can we say it's a holy city? Can we say that it stands incorruptible? No. This is still waiting to be fulfilled, and it will be fulfilled. This prophecy looks to the future. At this point in time, it has not been fulfilled. God makes it clear he'll return to Zion. He makes it clear that he's going to dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. It will be called the city of truth. Now today, Jerusalem is a city where there are more religions than you can poke a stick at. More religions. Every Christian organisation has built something there. There are all kinds of cults and isms there. It's not a city of truth today. And the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain, it's anything but holy. But it will be holy when he takes up residence to reign and rule. But you know what? He's not back there yet. It's still waiting to happen. Thus says the Lord, I am returned to Zion and will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem shall be a city of truth. Earlier, Isaiah had made it clear that Jerusalem is to become the capital of the earth. In the second part of his prophecy we read, the word of Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem, and it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all the nations shall flow into it. What an encouragement it would be if you're in exile, to hear that this is your future. God is literally going to come and dwell and reign and rule and live among you, and he's going to turn everything around. There'll be peace, there'll be prosperity, there'll be growth, there'll be development. It's coming. You would have been really encouraged. But Isaiah goes on with his prophecy and says, And many people shall go and say, Come ye, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we'll walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people. And get this, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. Wow. Who has taken that verse and used it as their own motto? The United Nations. How much chance have they got of fulfilling that? Not much. Particularly when it says the Lord will do it. That's when war will stop and there will be permanent peace. But you know what? We haven't come to that day yet. There's still much water to pass under the bridge. But we're starting to see the signs and symptoms if we stay alert and aware of what's happening in our world. There is a coming day when Jerusalem will be called the city of truth, the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. In other words, Zechariah is speaking of the establishment of the millennial kingdom, which still lies in the future. The Lord's sanctuary or dwelling place will be something that has never been seen before, and we'll look at these in depth in chapters 40 through 48. And remember I said to you when we started this section, chapters 35 through to 48, they're all dealing with Israel and its future. At its past, where it is now, and also what is to come. And I know many of you are looking forward to next week's because it talks about Gog and Magog. Well, may you ask, who are they? Well, you're going to have to wait till next week to come and find out. But they do play a part. But it's in reference and relationship to the nation of Israel. So please, if we've covered a lot of ground, hang in there. It will slowly but surely unveil itself to you if you just hang in there. We're going to turn for a